There's a special kind of peace that settles over Cedar Hill Lake right after sunrise. The water is like glass, untouched, and the sky takes its sweet time switching from lavender to gold. That's when you hear the good sounds. Someone dragging a chair across a wooden porch, the pop of a screen door, the low whistle of wind through pine. It's not just a place, it's a way of life. That's why I bought the cabin. It sits on a slope with a clear shot of lake, 2 stories of handcrafted cedar, a wraparound porch with hanging ferns, and my favorite part, a private dock with a floating boathouse. It's the kind of place you earn after 20 years of showing up early and clocking out late. I'm Daniel Morris, mid-40s, worked in foundation repair all my life, and finally carved out a slice of peace I didn't need anyone's approval to enjoy. Except someone did think they had a say. Carol Jennings. The first time I met her, she was standing on the edge of her inherited lakefront lot, clipboard in one hand, binoculars in the other, like she was conducting some kind of silent census on every duck and kayak that passed by. She wore this stiff yellow cardigan, even though it was 80 degrees, and those oversized sunglasses that make it look like someone's constantly judging you from behind tinted glass. Morning. I offered. She didn't respond, just scribbled something down on her clipboard and squinted toward my dock. Now to be clear, Carol didn't live here. Her house was 5 miles east in a gated community called Oak Gardens. There, she was a self-appointed HOA enforcer. Not elected, not hired, just self-installed. She called herself Vice President of External Standards. I kid you not. It was printed on the business cards she handed out at block parties. Carol's sister, Lorraine, had owned the cabin next to mine. Sweet woman. Always brought over banana bread in winter and invited folks over for board games on snow days. But when Lorraine passed suddenly, lung cancer, from what I heard, Carol inherited the lot. Instead of selling it or building something of her own, she started visiting it like she was patrolling enemy territory. That's when things shifted. At first, she just made herself visible, parking her white Lexus SUV right on the gravel edge of the property, folding chair in the trunk, binoculars in her lap. She'd sit for hours, watching the water like she was waiting for someone to jaywalk across it. Then came the signs. At first, they were small, no wake zone printed in faded black marker, stuck on wooden stakes along the shore. Then laminated notices started showing up on public bulletin boards. Unsafe boating practices reported in this area. Please be considerate. One day, I even found a printed diagram taped to my boathouse showing how noise from my speedboat could agitate native waterfowl. I almost laughed. Almost. But then it got personal. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee, walked down the dock, and found a neon orange sticky note pressed to the Scarab's windshield. This vessel is inappropriate for a family lakefront. Please remove or store off-site. CJ, that boat wasn't just a toy. It was my reward. A cherry red Scarab Thunder with twin engines that could rocket across a lake like it was skating on pure adrenaline. I'd spent 2 years restoring it. New upholstery, custom LED trim, digital navigation. When I wasn't using it, I treated it like a collector's piece. Cleaned it weekly, covered it every night. So no, I didn't appreciate a woman, who didn't even live in our lake community, suggesting it didn't fit the image. I confronted her gently at first. Carol, I said, standing at the property line one afternoon, this lake isn't governed by your HOA. We're not under Oak Gardens jurisdiction. She didn't even look up from her clipboard. Responsibility doesn't require jurisdiction, she replied, scribbling something. This community still deserves standards. From who? She tapped her badge, the shiny little Oak Gardens pin she always wore, and smiled like she'd just been knighted. At the next town meeting, she made a scene, stood up during public comment, and accused certain lakefront owners of contributing to erosion and atmospheric noise pollution. It was clear who she meant. Everyone glanced at me. I didn't even bother reacting. Still, I stayed respectful. Even when she called Fish and Wildlife to inspect my dock for unregulated bait storage. Even when she reported my nephew's jet ski as a nuisance vehicle. Even when she rang the sheriff's office to inquire about the legality of full-throttle vessels near shared waterfronts. Nothing stuck, because none of it was illegal. But the point wasn't the law. It was control. And then she chained my dock. Yeah, I walked out one Saturday morning with a thermos in hand, ready to take my nephew and his buddies out for a run. And there it was, a thick, rusted chain looped between both dock cleats, padlocked and tagged with a note. Do not remove, safety hold. Community concern registered. The padlock had the initials say engraved on the side. The gall. I took photos, sent them to the sheriff. He chuckled. Carol again, he said. I'll talk to her. But unless she damaged the boat, it's trespassing at best. I didn't press charges. Yet, thought, maybe it'd end there. But Carol wasn't done. Not by a mile. That Memorial Day weekend, I had friends and family over. Coolers full of beer, burgers on the grill, music low enough not to bother anyone. I took a minute alone just before dusk, one of those quiet guy moments. Walked down to the dock just to look at the scarab. Only it was gone. At first, I thought maybe my nephew took it for a spin. But his truck was still in the driveway. Everyone was on the porch. The dock ropes were loose, sloppily untied, not cut. My stomach dropped. Then someone shouted, "Hey, isn't that your boat?" I turned, and sure enough, across the water, there was my speedboat, red and sleek, and carving the lake like it owned it, spray flying from the stern like a rooster tail. And behind the wheel, Carol Jennings, in her stiff yellow cardigan, hair blowing in the wind, oversized sunglasses reflecting the dying sun. She wasn't joyriding. She was taking it, commandeering it, piloting it like she had a mission. Someone else called out, "She's on her phone. She's on the phone." And then the absurdity hit me. She was calling 911 from my boat. I could barely process it. Carol had stolen my speedboat and was now calling the cops about it, as if I was the one doing something wrong. But I didn't panic. Instead, I reached for my phone and called someone who would know exactly what to do. You ever have one of those moments where reality starts to split? Where what's happening in front of you is so absurd, so totally out of bounds, that your brain lags behind trying to make sense of it? That's exactly where I stood, barefoot on my dock, staring across the lake as HOA Karen, a.k.a. Carol Jennings, sliced through the water at full throttle in my speedboat, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a phone in her ear like she was reporting a stolen shopping cart. She'd stolen my boat, and she was calling 911. "Are we calling the cops?" Someone shouted from the porch. I think she already did. I muttered, still stunned, from my boat. People were starting to gather on neighboring docks. Phones were raised. The distant roar of the twin engines echoed over the water like thunder in a canyon. My nephew Cole jogged down behind me, shirt half on, sunglasses crooked. "Uncle Dan," he said, panting, "please tell me this is a prank." I handed him a note she left on the dock cleat, written in that all-caps elementary school teacher handwriting. "Boat seized for community safety review. Per temporary oversight order, CJ." He stared at it. Did she just steal your boat under an imaginary HOA clause? Apparently so. Then I made the most important call of the day. Not 911. I called Sheriff Travis McMillan. Travis and I go back 15 years. He was my customer once, during a nasty foundation sink at his uncle's place. We'd stayed friendly since. The kind of guy who'll text you if your truck door's left cracked at the gas station. He picked up on the second ring. "Danny?" She took the scarab. "Who did?" "Carol Jennings." There was a pause. "You're telling me HOA Carol just stole your speedboat?" Full throttle. She's heading toward the East Bluff. Has a phone to her ear, probably filing a complaint about me as we speak. He sighed. "Let me guess. She thinks you're breaking maritime decibel codes or something. Or waking the ducks. Take your pick." He whistled low. "Okay, I'm calling Deputy Martinez now. Sit tight. Don't go after her. Last thing we need is you both in cuffs over lake drama." "Copy that. But you may want to send a patrol boat out of Cedar Bluff Station. She's not exactly easing off the throttle." Now this is where it got messy, eh? Because Carol wasn't just taking a joyride. She was staging a citizen seizure. Yep. 15 minutes later, While we were all still watching the water, I got a call from Travis again. "Danny, brace yourself. 911 dispatch just got a report from Carol. She claims you illegally stored an unlicensed vessel, and she was forced to act in defense of the lakefront public good." "You gotta be kidding." "Oh, and she said she's in fear for her life because the vessel was vibrating violently and potentially rigged for retaliation. She thinks I booby-trapped my boat. She said it was shaking and emitting fumes. Likely just the twin engines kicking into gear, but she's making it sound like a floating meth lab." I rubbed my eyes. This woman wasn't just delusional. She was building a case. Within the hour, we had 2 patrol cars parked in my gravel driveway. One deputy interviewed me, my nephew, 3 of my friends, and took photos of the dock. The other headed toward the East Bluff, where Carol had apparently decided to secure the boat by beaching it near a rocky outcrop and quarantining it behind yellow rope tape, caution tape, like she picked it up from the dollar store on the way. And yes, she had caution tape. She wrapped it around the helm. The sheriff texted me the photos later. There was my $80,000 Scarab, parked diagonally across a public access point, wrapped in caution. "Do not cross," taped with Carol standing in front like she was unveiling the Ark of the Covenant. She told deputies it was a necessary protective action and that non-compliance by neighboring boaters had forced her hand. Travis, God bless him, kept it cool. He didn't arrest her yet. He told her that unless she could provide documentation authorizing the seizure of private property on unregulated water, she was violating multiple state codes. Carol doubled down, demanded a field inspection, and said she would remain on scene to preserve the evidence. That's when I started feeling the shift. At first, I was just mad, stunned, embarrassed, and furious. But watching this unfold, something deeper clicked. Carol wasn't just playing power games. She was trying to break me down by rule slaughtering the lake to death. She didn't care about property lines or noise. She wanted dominance. She wanted submission. She wanted me gone. And I realized something important. You can't be a control freak by arguing. You beat them by letting the system she trusts so much crush her with her own rules. Over the next 2 days, Carol went full press. She emailed the town council, sent in blurry drone footage of my dock, filed a formal complaint with the local EPA office about fuel leakage, even launched a petition among Oak Gardens residents, people who didn't even live on the lake, urging for expanded HOA values into Cedar Hill. And when that didn't work, she tried to play the victim. Local Facebook pages started lighting up with half-truths. Speedboats threatened shoreline families. Local man refuses to quiet disruptive engine. Noise complaint ignored. Resident takes action. She painted herself as a martyr, a suburban Erin Brockovich. If Erin Brockovich wore boat shoes and carried around laminated lake maps from the 80s. But it was too much, too fast, too blatant. Because while she was busy building her version of the truth, I was working quietly behind the scenes with Sheriff McMillan, the Department of Watercraft Licensing, and even a local news contact I'd helped with storm cleanup a few years back. I gathered every text, every photo, every note she left. I documented the chain incident. I pulled ring cam footage of her trespassing on my dock 3 different times. And yes, there was a camera mounted on the boathouse. She never saw it, but it caught her untying the Scarab and stepping on like she owned it. By the 3rd day, Travis called me again. "Danny, you like this? We just got a call from Carol." "Oh boy." "She says you're harassing her with facts." "Facts?" "Yep. She found out you've been working with us to report her actions, and now she's accusing you of character defamation. I've already looped in the DA." "So what happens next?" "Well," he said with a grin I could hear over the phone, "next time she takes that boat for a spin, she won't be the one calling 911. By the end of that week, I had a choice to make. Not about pressing charges. Sheriff McMillan and the DA were already handling that side. No, this was bigger. It was about setting a precedent. Making sure Carol Jennings never pulled this kind of stunt again on me or anyone else. The trick was not to lash out. Carol wanted a fight. She thrived on conflict, on turning neighborhood squabbles into courtroom dramas. If I took the bait, She'd twist it, edit the story, and parade around as the misunderstood guardian of community values. She'd call herself a whistleblower. The headline would read, "Woman tries to save lake, gets sued by angry man." But if I could flip the narrative, subtly, legally, and publicly, I could let the world watch her undo herself. So I got to work. First, I filed a formal property interference complaint. That kicked off a process with the county that required a public review, something Carol didn't expect. She thought this was a neighbor dispute. But once I showed evidence of repeated trespassing, false claims of law enforcement, and unlawful seizure of property, it moved into a higher gear. The DA called it reckless civilian intervention. Sheriff McMillan called it plain dumb. Carol was served with a notice to appear in mediation, and she was livid. She didn't even try to hide it. She marched down to the edge of her lot the next morning, phone in hand, recorded herself ranting about harassment and political targeting. She even tried to provoke me by yelling across the property line, but I didn't respond. I was already a few moves ahead. Second, I launched a Freedom of Information request. See, Carol had been filing complaints about my boat for months, to every agency she could think of: Fish and Wildlife, Local Zoning Board, the Lake Preservation Alliance. But public complaints are public record. And once I had copies of every email she sent, laced with paranoia, unverified accusations, and at least 3 that cited made-up ordinances, I knew exactly what to do. I packaged the worst of it into a PDF. Then I submitted it as background material for her mediation hearing. But I didn't stop there. I also sent a copy to the Oak Gardens HOA board, the actual one. Turns out, while Carol liked to parade around as the neighborhood's unofficial regulator, she didn't have official board approval for anything she'd been doing. The board president, a woman named Judy Halverson, called me herself. "Mr. Morris," she said, "I had no idea Carol was involving herself in external matters. That's not within her role. She's calling herself Vice President of External Standards." I told her. There was a long pause. Then Judy sighed. "There's no such position in our bylaws." That's when I realized the house of cards was starting to tilt. Third, I made a quiet little visit to the county archives. See, Carol had inherited the lot next to me after her sister passed, but she never officially registered it as a separate residential property. On paper, it was still zoned under Lorraine's name. That meant Carol didn't technically own it. She was acting on it, building little decks, planting fake signage, hosting HOA gatherings. But legally, she didn't exist on that land. Once I had the zoning data, I passed it to Travis. The sheriff grinned when I showed him the parcel ID and zoning mismatch. "Danny," he said, "this is getting better than Netflix." Now, here's where it got fun. A week after I filed the interference complaint, I quietly arranged a community barbecue. I invited everyone on our side of the lake, folks who'd been watching Carol's antics in silence. It wasn't a rally, just burgers, music, and projector screen I set up on the boathouse wall. The final event of the night? A little home movie. I played a video montage I had stitched together, clips from the Ring camera, screenshots of her caution tape, the moment she unchained the dock, the footage of her riding off in the Scarab, phone to her ear, and at the very end, a simple freeze frame of the sheriff's deputy handing her the notice to appear in mediation. People roared. One guy, retired Air Force vet named Phil, nearly fell out his lawn chair. "About time someone put that woman in her place," he said, holding up his solo cup. To Daniel, cheers went up around the dock. For the first time since all this began, I felt the tide shift. No more silent head shakes. No more whispered frustrations. People were done with her. Carol, of course, heard about the party. She tried to crash it the next day, sent an email to the HOA board accusing me of inciting civil unrest and orchestrating a defamation screening. But the board didn't take the bait. In fact, they just held their own emergency meeting. And Carol? She was suspended. Indefinite leave from any HOA advisory role. Judy told me in a follow-up email, pending review of behavior and public conduct unbecoming of a board-affiliated resident. But the cherry on top, I got a call from Lake Region News 6. Turns out, A producer had seen the Facebook post one of my neighbors made about the HOA boat theft saga and wanted to run a feel-good summer segment about community versus control. I agreed on one condition: Carol's name wouldn't be used. Just an overzealous lakefront visitor. The segment aired Sunday night. Footage of the scarab, me at the grill, clips of laughing neighbors. A final quote from me over shots of the peaceful lake at dusk. Out here, we don't need patrols. We need peace. And peace doesn't come from enforcing. It comes from respecting the water and each other. That quote got clipped and went viral on a local boating forum. Then it hit Reddit. And that, right there, is when Carol lost the script. Blue skies, no wind. Lake like glass. I was down on the dock around 7:30, tying down the scarab after a maintenance run. I just topped off the tank and tuned the engines. Everything felt calm, peaceful, suspiciously peaceful. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, and there she was, Carol Jennings, standing beside her white Lexus, arms folded, visor tilted low like she was shielding herself from moral corruption. And beside her, Deputy Martinez. She marched down the shared property line like she owned it. Behind her, a cameraman. A cameraman. That's when it hit me. She was filming her own version of the story. She'd seen the local news segment, the Facebook posts, the barbecue video montage, and now, in full desperation, she was trying to salvage her image, rewrite the narrative, flip the roles. She had even started a blog, Saving Cedar Hill, claiming she was exposing rampant noncompliance and silent corruption in lakeside communities. So she came to stage a scene. Deputy Martinez looked mildly uncomfortable. He gave me a subtle nod like, just play along, let it burn out. Carol waved toward the dock. This is the exact vessel, she said loudly to the camera, that was illegally stored without municipal tags. My initial call to 911 was for community protection. I will now document its return to this dock. Carol, I said slowly, this isn't your property. You're trespassing. This is documentation, she said, waving a piece of paper. I'm protected under citizen observer statutes. Martinez stepped forward. Ms. Jennings, I advised you earlier that this isn't a formal inspection. And this gentleman, he nodded toward me, has complied with every relevant statute, including permits, safety codes, and even voluntary noise compliance. She stiffened. That's not how I understand it. I understand it that way, said a new voice behind her. Sheriff Travis McMillan. He walked up with two more deputies, holding a folder under one arm and wearing that unshakable calm that only a man raised around cattle and chaos can manage. Carol Jennings, he said plainly, this isn't a documentary. It's an active investigation. Her face went white. I'm sorry, she said, suddenly softening her voice for the camera. We have video footage of you operating a private vessel without permission, without registration, and without owner consent. That's felony unauthorized use of property, plus misrepresentation to emergency services. I was reporting a threat. You were driving the boat, Carol. You can't report a theft while you're behind the wheel of the thing you claim was stolen. The cameraman slowly lowered his gear. I stepped back. This wasn't my show anymore. Travis held up the folder. In here, he said, we have copies of every complaint you made. Most were dismissed as frivolous. But 3 agencies have confirmed you fabricated citations and posed as an enforcement officer. I never claimed that. You introduce yourself to multiple people as Vice President of External Standards. That's impersonation. I was just... You put caution tape on someone else's vessel, Carol. Her voice cracked. That was for public safety. The only person in danger, he said firmly, was you, when you took off at full throttle without any training on a 600-horsepower hull. That's when he nodded to Martinez. Let's walk her down. Martinez gently took her by the elbow. Ms. Jennings, we're going to escort you to the vehicle for questioning. You're arresting me, she gasped. For now, we're detaining you for statements. Your lawyer can meet you at the station. And as she was walked back to the Lexus, she turned just once and looked at me, but this time there was no smugness, no clipboard, no righteous stance, just panic, confusion, and behind all, the terrifying realization that she'd lost control. But we weren't done yet. Travis turned back toward the dock. "You know what would really tie a bow on this?" he said with a half grin. "Why don't we give her what she wanted? Full documentation. Meaning, take the boat out. Fast, loud, legal. And I'll have Martinez follow you in a patrol boat with a drone." "You serious?" "Dead serious. If she wants a spectacle for the court record, let's make it official." So that's exactly what we did. I slipped on my boating shades, untied the Scarab, and fired up the engines. The twin 300s roared like sleeping dragons coming to life. Martinez launched the sheriff's patrol boat right behind me, GoPro mounted on the bow, drone hovering high above. I took off down the lake, fast but within limits. The wake rolled behind me like curtains pulling apart. Neighbors stepped out of their cabins to wave. A few even cheered. When I hit the open stretch near the eastern bluff, I opened the throttle wide. The Scarab surged forward, skimming across the surface, roaring with freedom. The drone zipped overhead, catching every second. When I looked back, I could see the patrol boat trailing me in the distance. Sirens quiet, lights flashing blue in the sunlight, like it was all part of the show. And back on shore, Carol watched from the backseat of the patrol cruiser. Window cracked, face unreadable. She wanted control. Instead, she got a front row seat to the most satisfying, legally documented defeat of her life. On the very lake, she tried to micromanage into submission. I did 3 victory loops, eased the boat back to idle, and docked clean. The deputies gave me a thumbs up. The drone landed in the grass like a tired bird returning home. Travis clapped me on the shoulder. "She's going to lose her board privileges, maybe more," he said. "This whole thing's headed straight for county court." And the footage? Archived, labeled, shared with the DA. And, he added, I might use it for training new deputies on how to deal with neighborhood nonsense. We laughed, but then he paused. "You did good, Dan. You didn't escalate. You just let her sink herself." "I knew she'd overreach," I said. "They always do." And with that, I looked out over the lake, peaceful again. No caution tape, no screaming, no clipboard crusaders. Just birds overhead and water waiting for the next quiet ride. But my favorite part? As I walked back to cabin, someone had left a laminated note on my porch swing. No name, no signature, just 6 words. HOA free zone. Keep it that way. You'd think after all that, after the drone footage, the public takedown, the deputy escorting to a patrol cruiser, Carol Jennings would vanish like a bad memory, that she'd tuck her tail, retreat to Oak Gardens, and quietly retire from her self-declared HOA patrol career. But no, control freaks don't surrender. They adapt. They rebrand. They find new ways to whisper their influence into the lives of people who never asked for it. For the first few days after the lake incident, things were peaceful, more peaceful than they had been in months. My neighbors called it the quiet bloom, that moment after storm when you realize how loud the thunder had been. No notes on mailboxes. No binocular surveillance from the next lot. No bogus citations printed on stolen HOA letterhead. Carol had gone completely silent, but not because she'd learned her lesson, because she was busy shifting the narrative. It started on her blog, Saving Cedar Hill. She changed her tone. No more bold accusations or dramatic exposes. Instead, she framed herself as a whistleblower who had been shamed and silenced for speaking truth. Her post titled The Speedboat Saga, a citizen's ordeal, claimed she had tried to flag safety violations, was falsely detained, and that she was now exploring legal counsel. Of course, she failed to mention that her legal counsel had already advised her to settle, that the county prosecutor had filed 3 misdemeanor charges against her: trespassing, unauthorized use of private property, and misuse of emergency services, that she'd signed a conditional deferral that required 6 months of behavioral compliance or risk criminal prosecution. And part of that agreement, she was forbidden from stepping foot on the Cedar Hill lakefront for a full calendar year. But again, Carol didn't go away. She pivoted. About 2 weeks later, I got a tip from Judy Halverson, the actual president of Oak Gardens HOA. She sent me a screenshot of a post Carol had made in a private Facebook group for Suburban Community Wellness Volunteers. It read, "I'm forming a Waterway Standards Advisory Group to provide oversight for recreational areas ignored by official enforcement. If you live near Cedar Hill or other lakefront zones, join me in restoring order." It was vintage Carol. No jurisdiction, no credentials, just inflated self-righteousness wrapped in the word standards. But this time, people weren't falling for it. The tide had turned. Neighbors she once scared into submission now knew her playbook. A few had spoken up at town meetings. Others had posted their own stories online, like the retired couple she tried to shame for their unregulated wind chimes, or the single mom she threatened over her son's unsupervised scooter activity. Each post was shared and reshared, until Carol's reputation collapsed into parody. One local blog dubbed her the Admiral of HOA and turned her story into a satirical cartoon, her likeness sailing a rubber duck across a lake, shouting about bylaws through a megaphone. It went viral. By the time summer was in full swing, Carol's HOA standing had evaporated. She was officially removed from any advisory capacity in Oak Gardens. Her blog had turned off comments, and her petition to expand HOA oversight into Cedar Hill flatly denied by the Township Planning Committee. But poetic justice doesn't always come in headlines. Sometimes it arrives quietly on a flyer. One afternoon in August, I was walking my property line with a rake when I noticed a sign stapled to a wooden pole. It had big, bold letters across the top. Annual Cedar Hill Lakefront Festival. Open to public. No HOA restrictions. It listed barbecues, jet ski races, tubing relays, even a Decorate Your Dock contest. And there, at the bottom, in smaller print, sponsored by the Department of Recreation and the Sheriff's Office, in celebration of lakefront freedoms and community peace. I laughed out loud, because the event date, exactly 1 year from the day Carol had stolen my speedboat, a full-circle burn. But the cherry on top? Remember how Carol never technically filed the deed transfer on the property she inherited next door? Turns out, during her legal mess, she missed the annual property tax payment. By the end of the year, the county flagged the parcel for lien sale. Guess who bought it? Not me. I didn't need that drama. But my neighbor Phil, the Air Force vet who nearly fell out his chair laughing during the barbecue, he snatched it up in cash. And the first thing he built? A floating patio, anchored directly in front of where Carol used to park her folding chair and binoculars. He called it the observation deck. Added a sign that said, "Public viewing encouraged. HOA feedback not accepted." People came from all over to take photos. Boaters waved as they passed. Someone even tagged the location on Instagram with the caption, "Where HOA Karens go to lose." And Carol? She eventually stopped showing up altogether. No blog posts. No group invites. No appearances at council meetings. The last anyone saw of her, she was walking her tiny designer dog in the back alleys of Oak Gardens, avoiding main streets, avoiding questions. I heard through the grapevine that her Lexus was repossessed, that her community consulting business lost its only 2 clients, and that she now spends most of her time rewriting HOA handbooks for fantasy neighborhoods that exist only in her mind. But I didn't follow up. I didn't need to, because the lake stayed peaceful. The dock stayed unchained. The caution tape stayed gone. And every time I took the scarab out, I passed the floating patio, raised my hand in a casual salute, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not just because Carol was gone, but because I never let her pull me down to her level. She tried to enforce shame. I answered with dignity. She tried to silence community. We answered with celebration. In the end, she was right about one thing. Someone needed to protect the lake. But that someone wasn't her. It was all of us. Together. Neighbors. Friends. Families who just wanted peace on the water. And thanks to her, we finally understood how valuable that peace really was. So yeah, she called 911 after stealing my speedboat. But the only thing she really hijacked was her own reputation.